Can you imagine that a sanction in Formula One is based on two official reports that contradict each other? What if I told you that one of them admits that the pilot could not avoid the maneuver for which he was punished? What is happening within the FIA, and why has Fred Vasseur, the boss of Ferrari, dropped the most explosive bomb of the year? It all started at the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix. What should have been just another race on the calendar turned into a regulatory scandal that has opened a dangerous crack in the credibility of the FIA. It was on the 6th lap, when Lewis Hamilton, then 4th in the standings, was fighting intensely with Max Verstappen for a key position. In one of the most intense maneuvers of the day, Hamilton locked the brakes entering turn 4, forcing him to go off the track. In milliseconds, he chose what seemed like the least risky option, cutting the chicane to avoid an accident. It seemed like a logical, even inevitable move. But the punishment was immediate, a 10-second penalty for leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage. Up to this point, you might think that this is an infraction like many others. But the story took a radical turn when, days later, two official FIA documents describing the same incident were leaked to the specialized press, with completely opposite conclusions. One of them, document 36, detailed the reasons why Hamilton should be penalized. But the other, document 37, became pure dynamite. That second document, signed by the same stewards, explicitly admitted that Hamilton had a justified technical reason for not having followed the usual procedure when leaving the track. His car was completely out of control due to the brakes locking, and it was physically impossible to follow the escape route established by the race director. This recognition, coming from those responsible for applying the sanction, exposed a frontal contradiction within the system. In other words, a driver was penalized for a maneuver that, according to the FIA itself, was inevitable and justified. Not only that, it was a punishment that was unprecedented in its severity. 10 seconds is not a common penalty for this type of situation. The standard penalty is 5 seconds. But the most serious thing is that no other driver in similar situations during the same race was sanctioned. This situation brought to the table a much deeper problem: the internal decision-making structure of the FIA, its steward system, and the way in which sporting justice is administered in real time. It was no longer just a question of whether Hamilton deserved the sanction. The debate was bigger, more worrying. It was the credibility of the FIA that was at stake. This leak, far from being anecdotal, has been described by experts as a tacit admission of error. And in a sport where millimetric decisions define championships, contracts, and millions of euros, an error of this caliber cannot be swept under the rug. On the contrary, this incident has set off all the alarms on and off the track. It has become a litmus test for the internal workings of the FIA, an organization that now finds itself at the center of a storm of criticism, doubt, and widespread indignation. Are we facing a specific failure or a symptom of a broken system? This question will mark everything that comes next. And as we will see in the next few minutes, the reaction of Ferrari and his boss Fred Vasseur was immediate. What started as a simple race penalty now threatens to become one of the biggest political and sporting scandals in the recent history of Formula One. It all broke loose on lap 6. Hamilton, already with temperature in the tires and involved in a tactical battle with Max Verstappen, was approaching the most critical area of the first sector. When braking for turn 4, his car experienced a brake lock. It was not a miscalculation or excessive aggressiveness. It was a technical incident. At that speed, the car became destabilized and it became impossible to follow the trajectory marked by the race director's notes. The only safe way: cut the chicane and rejoin with the least possible risk. The maneuver was immediate, instinctive. Survive first, fight later. But minutes later, in a dry and formal statement, the FIA issued document 36, 10 seconds of penalty to Hamilton for having left the track and gained a lasting advantage. There was no possible defense at the time. The Ferrari team, in which Hamilton plays in this new stage, chose not to respond immediately. You had to focus on the race. But what no one expected was what would happen next. Hours later, a second official document, document 37, emerged from the same FIA offices. Its content unleashed chaos. In it, the stewards themselves who signed the sanction explained that Hamilton had a completely valid technical justification for having done what he did. That, due to the blockade, it was physically impossible to follow the prescribed escape route. In simple words, they punished him for something he could not avoid. And the most disturbing thing, they knew it. This doublespeak, captured in writing in sealed documents, broke the line of trust that every sport needs between those who compete and those who enforce the rules. The question that began to circulate through the halls of the paddock was simple, but devastating. How can a driver be sanctioned for an action that has been recognized as inevitable? Vasseur, as soon as the race concluded at the post-Grand Prix press conference, the French director of Ferrari did not wait for the FIA to offer explanations or for the press to develop theories. It was direct, specific, and above all, challenging. His words were not an emotional vent. They were a carefully framed accusation. It cost us P4. The penalty is one thing, of course. We didn't follow the race director's notes. But 10 seconds. I don't remember anyone getting 10 seconds for this. If we consider the overall picture, Max cut the corner early, cut the chicane in the grass, 100 meters. I think it's not very well managed, honestly. This was not just a technical reproach. It was an allegation of double standards. Vasseur clearly pointed out the unequal application of the rules. He used Max Verstappen as an example, recalling that the Dutch driver also cut the track even more flagrantly at the same start of the race. But unlike Hamilton, he was not sanctioned. The question remained, why some yes and others no? The Ferrari director went further. He argued that if the FIA had applied the standard 5-second penalty, Hamilton would have retained fourth position. And on a circuit like Mexico, where overtaking opportunities are scarce and DRS has a limited impact due to altitude, that difference is critical. 10 seconds is equivalent in this context to condemning a driver to disappear from the competitive zone. In short, it was not a simple penalty, it was a sporting execution. But the most delicate thing came later. According to sources within the paddock, Vasseur would have received information that the decision to apply the 10 seconds was less technical and more political. A premeditated move to send a clear message from the FIA, reaffirm its authority after weeks of questions about the management of track limits, errors in the application of sanctions, and lack of consistency between races. In this context, Hamilton's punishment would not have been an act of justice, but rather a symbolic act, a demonstration of power. And that, for Vasseur, was unacceptable. You can't play judge when the rules are not the same for everyone, he said privately to accredited media. What the Frenchman made clear with his position was that Ferrari was not going to tolerate decisions that seemed arbitrary, not only for defending Hamilton, but for what Ferrari represents as an institution. A historic team with the largest number of titles in the history of the championship cannot afford silence when the legitimacy of the regulatory system is called into question. It all goes back to a braking error. But it wasn't a miscalculation or pilot failure. It was a direct consequence of the braking system under extreme altitude conditions. At the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, located more than 2,200 meters above sea level, the cars suffer a significant loss of aerodynamic load, which decreases grip and reduces effective braking capacity. In this environment, even braking that would be completely stable on other circuits can become a risky scenario. According to telemetry data shared by Ferrari to the technical media and leaked among paddock engineers, Hamilton's SF25 locked both front wheels when entering the braking zone of Turn 4. This generated a total loss of directional control for just over a second, a minimum period for a spectator, but eternal for a driver at more than 280 kilometers per hour. At that moment, the possibility of following the race line or even taking the escape route marked by the race director was simply non-existent. What was surprising was not only the error, but the lack of an immediate rectification mechanism. Nobody expected the FIA to go back on its sanction, but neither could one imagine that in the face of such a flagrant contradiction, the body would remain totally silent. That failure to respond was, for many, more serious than the penalty itself. Teams like Mercedes and McLaren, although without publicly entering into the controversy, hinted that they viewed the matter with concern. Informally, engineers and strategy directors consulted by specialized media expressed their concern. If the FIA can sanction ignoring telemetry and its own internal notes, where is the confidence in sports decision-making? Mercedes director Toto Wolff was brief but accurate when asked about the case. We are not in a position to give an opinion on sanctions that do not directly involve us, but what is clear is that transparency in the process is fundamental for the credibility of the sport. A diplomatic phrase that, however, carried an implicit criticism. The FIA, so far, has not issued an official explanation that clarifies why the contradiction between its documents occurred. And the more time passes, the greater the reputational cost. Because every day without a response, every institutional silence, only feeds the perception that the organization not only failed, but is not willing to assume its responsibility. At Mercedes, the tone was more technical than political. George Russell commented that it is essential that we all understand why the decisions that are made, especially when the data says otherwise. A phrase loaded with meaning. In the language of Formula One, data is the foundation of all technical discussions. If these are ignored by those who judge, the common reference point that sustains the entire competitive structure is lost. Pilots like Fernando Alonso, usually frank in their statements, did not hide their discontent with the handling of the incident. In a later interview in a mixed zone, he commented without mentioning names, "You can't change the criteria from one corner to another. Today is one, tomorrow is another. You can't race like that." That statement was widely interpreted as a criticism of the FIA and was picked up by various media outlets as a sign that the racing community is beginning to lose patience. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.